perform the song Look to Your Heart is one of the lead actresses, Michelle Urbana.
Picture him at 17, go on a try, looks that could rival James Dean, girls would cry, played sax, great dancer, what a romancer, but I saw something more there from the start. That boy had heart, God, he had heart. Think that he didn't think big, sure he did. Dragging that horn to each gig, bright-eyed kid. That dream he chased, so close he couldn't taste it. And every note he played a work of art, straight from his heart. Boy, he had heart. Ask me what happened, well, really it wasn't dramatic. You came along and were kind of a sort of surprise. Somehow the sax ended up in a box in the attic. I'll tell you the reason, one look in your eyes. Each day he gets on that bus, no one cheers. Know why he does it for us all these years. Sure, he's tough, you can't budge him, but don't you dare judge him unless you judge him by his greatest part. Look to his heart, then look to your heart.
You're so beautiful.
Michelle.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I know I butchered your last name. Tell us your last name.
It was a good attempt.
Aravena.
Aravena. It was so close.
I went last night to see A Bronze Tale, and there was so much laughter and so much joy and a few tears, of course, because Broadway musicals are supposed to do that with us.
We have a full package there with this show, for sure.
It was so much fun, and that music was just so incredible. But remind everybody kind of what the story is.
Well, it's a true story based on Chaz Palminteri's story, and not a lot of people know that. But basically, it starts with a young boy who witnesses a murder on the stoop of his front step. It already sounds scary, but it's a very, very light, bright musical. And then because of a sequence of events, he befriends a mob boss, Sonny, and we watch his character kind of navigate decisions as he gets older, and whether to follow his father or whether to follow his father figure, Sonny, and in the end, they're both giving him the same advice, which is like the choices you make will navigate the path you take.
Right. They always say the saddest thing in life is wasted talent.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, you are a beautiful talent.
Oh, thank you.
And there are some amazing names supporting this play. Tell us about them.
I know, so I have to pinch myself every once in a while, but you know, we have, we'll start with Chaz Palminteri, who, you know, it's his story. It started as a one-man show and then became a very famous movie and now is a musical. So he wrote the musical. We have Jerry Zaks, who's a very famous director for film and theater, and then we have Robert De Niro.
I was waiting
If
for
anybody,
that.
if anybody knows that guy.
Robert De Niro.
Who was in rehearsals with us, watching us sing and dance for 6 hours a day.
Wow.
And you would almost forget that he was there because he was such a quiet man, but watching these two men, you know, work together to bring this musical to its feet was something extraordinary. And then we have Alan Menken, Glenn Slater, Sergio Trujillo. I mean, the list goes on.
All of the top-notch players are behind this play, and only 1 week only, through March 31st.
And I love it because you were on the Broadway performance.
I was.
As was Richard Blake, that plays your husband, and maybe what,
we have
a
11.
dozen?
We have
yeah.
11 cast members from Broadway, which doesn't usually happen. So come out and see us.
Come out and see. You will laugh, you will cry, you will just leave having so much fun. And we thank you for getting up with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Michelle, your voice is amazing. We're going to put this online if you want to see her sing again. Make sure you get out and see the play, and we'll be back with more Great Day after this.
We continue our celebration of
The DC Divas are in the house next.
And coming up, we've got baseball on the brain. So tomorrow, Nats Park opening day, but right here at the St. James, baseball is in full swing. We're back with more right after this.
And those temperatures warm up just in time for opening day. I'm tracking it for you straight ahead.
I see and hear Maine's voices and visions reflected in the land, water, and sky. This is me.
Ready to go when you are.
Wow, you look nice. Getting around isn't as easy as it used to be. That's why we called Bath Fitter. They removed our old tub and installed a beautiful new spacious shower. Now, getting in and out is a breeze. And we have peace of mind with seamless walls that provide a watertight fit, plus their lifetime guarantee. Thanks to Bath Fitter, life is so much easier with a shower we love.
Call today for this month's offer.
How to get this yard?
Behind Pete's great-looking yard is his secret weapon, the Scott's Turf Builder program. It's the best way to get the yard you want all year long, guaranteed. All it takes is 4 feedings with a Scott's solution for every season. And with a customized plan from the Scott's My Lawn app, your yard can look like Pete's.
It's that easy.
This is a Scott's yard. Download the Scott's My Lawn app for your personalized plan.
I paid the price.
You paid too much.
For loving you.
No, for your glasses. They charged you too much.
Who?
Practically anyone who isn't America's best, where 2 pairs and a free exam are just $69.95.
That sounds good.
Music to your ears.
Speaking of, do you want to join?
I'm not really a singer.
Do you whistle?
It's not just a better deal, it's America's best. Never overpay, even with insurance. Get more with your vision insurance dollars at America's Best.
Is your house less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home.
My husband and I were faced with the decision of what to do with my father's home. The house required a lot of work. That's when I found Market Pro Home Buyers. Dan visited our home, and within minutes he gave us a quote. It was so easy. Dan even helped pay to pack and move us. Market Pro Home Buyers truly helped my family when we did not know what to do.
Call us today at 301-799-7355.
Time now is 9:25. After a cold spring morning, at least we're going to see some sunshine out there, but temperatures remain below average. Our forecasted high today is 54 degrees. We will see temperatures well below average. We should be at 60 around this time of the year, but that's okay. We're going to catch up to it starting tomorrow. It's a part of my weather headlines. Warm up starts Thursday. We're back into the 60s there. 70s on Friday and Saturday, but Sunday, the 70s come to an end. We've got a cold front coming in. We're going to have some showers and cooler temperatures, but right on cue, right? That warm up just in time for the Nats home opener. Look for temperatures right around the 62-degree mark by the time the game wraps up tomorrow. Mets are taking on our Nets in the home opener tomorrow. Don't see weather being a problem during the game. We're still tracking the cherry blossoms for you now. The peak bloom forecast is April 1st, so we just have another stage or so to go before we get to that peak bloom. In fact, this weekend, maybe a good weekend to check out the cherry blossoms because we're going to have some warmer temperatures and that can help speed up the process just a little bit. So that's what we'll be seeing. Colder weather slows it down. Remember, we got a cold front coming in on Sunday. Behind the front, we typically can get some breezy winds, so we'll have to watch out for that and make sure they don't get too strong. We don't want once they do start blooming, if they do speed up over the weekend, we don't want whatever blooms to blow off of the trees that we've just seen bloom. So this weekend, 76 on Saturday. That's a great day to check out the Cherry Blossom Festival if you plan on going out. And Sunday, we'll have a high around 60, but it will be showers out there for us on Sunday. So let's talk about that. Cold front heading our way on Sunday. That's what's going to give us the showers. The best timing for this as of now looks like it's going to be through early Sunday morning through Sunday afternoon. And once we get past that, we'll see those showers beginning to wrap up for us with the cooler and drier air making its way in. I want to show you what it looks like on Futurecast really quickly. So this is Friday. Northern suburbs could see a sprinkle on Friday morning. The rest of us remain dry. Sunday, more widespread showers across the area as that cold front comes slicing into the area. We dry out and cool off behind that front. Here's a look at our 7-day forecast. 54 today,
on tap with temperatures down to 38 degrees, 62 degrees Thursday. That's more like it. Pushing it up to 70 by Friday with stray showers and 76 on Saturday. Let's send it out to Andy now.
Hey, good morning to you. So this morning we are at the St. James. I mean, tomorrow's a big day. A lot of people thinking about baseball. So we wanted to give you something to kind of whet your appetite before Nats Park opening day tomorrow. We've got Ken Tyler here. He's the athletic director. You guys have an incredible space over the entire facility, guys, is almost 500,000 square feet. This is about 10,000.
Test 1 2 Judy. Test 1 2 Judy. Witness. Witness.
Athletics has seen how they can improve.
Yeah, opening day, spring, getting ready for summer camps, and we have it all here at the St. James. And the really cool thing is we've got an incredible facility, great concept, incredible coaches and trainers, and we've got something for everyone, whether you're a small kid just learning how to play, getting a love for the game, or an elite athlete.
Judy. Test 1 2 Chair. Test.
And that's what's really neat, guys, is right here, like in this area. You were saying you had some big names practicing in here the other day.
We did. DC United soccer team has been here a lot the last few days, and we've really enjoyed having them in, sort of a home away from home. And Katie Ledecky, the great swimmer, has been in here training. We've had a bunch of guys in here getting ready for the NFL draft. But in addition to all that, you know, the core of what we do is instilling a love of sports in kids and families, servicing it all under one roof. And from a baseball standpoint, being able to learn the game with great technology, have a lot, in great facilities. You can't put a price tag on it, so we're having a lot of fun.
And, you know, and we can pan around for a second. I mean, you guys, hopefully you can take the size of this space and notice the roof. I mean, rain or shine, baby, you can come out here and practice. And you guys, you know, you touched a little bit on summer camps, but let's revisit that because they're going to fill up. It's time for parents to start thinking, what am I going to do with the kiddos this summer?
Yeah, we've got a great offering of summer camps from we call ultimate sports camps where you get to sample a little bit of everything to elite sports camps where you really dive in to the fundamentals, the techniques that are going to take your game to the next level. And you're right, never a rain out at the St. James, always perfect weather.
You can't beat that. And so, yeah, I should probably sign up for a class. My baseball skills need a little bit of tweaking. You know, they're basically there. But, okay, guys, also coming up, we're going to explore some of the state-of-the-art technology that really is awesome in helping utilize and push you forward as you work on your skills, whether it's baseball or whatever sport. But today we're focusing on baseball. We're back with more right after this. Heads up, look alive.
Got it.
Good job.
Great job there, Andy. And another team that plays there at the St. James, the DC Divas, are excited about their new home. My next guest represents strong women everywhere as members of the DC Divas, a full contact women's football team. They kick off their 19th season coming up in just a couple weeks. I'm pleased to welcome wide receiver Lois Cook and rookie Tara Mason. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I mean, you get to play in that facility. That's fun.
Yeah, we're so excited to be a part of the St. James now. It's an amazing facility. The girls love it. I mean, we can practice. We can go to the spa afterwards. We can go to the restaurant. We can go in the pool. Some of the team members have kids. The kids can go in the active entertainment center.
Member mic check. Member mic check. Way up on the mic. A little back from the mic. Can you still hear me? 1 2 3.
At least be a little bit excited to get to practice now.
We're the first team to have an indoor field, so and rain or shine, you know, we'll be covered. So it's great.
That's awesome.
Member mic check. Right up on the mic. A little back from the mic. A little back from the mic. 1 2 3 4 5. 1 2 3 4 5. 1 2 3.
We're so ready for the season to begin. We've been working hard since October even. You know, some of the vets don't even stop practicing after the season's over, but we have a lot of new faces, a lot of rookies coming in, and a lot of talent on the team. So we're really excited.
So how many years have you been on the DC Divas?
9 years.
9 years. Okay, Tara, you're joining this year as a rookie. How excited are you?
I'm so excited. I think I'm joining at a great time. The organization is just getting better. It's the best women's football team around. I'm so honored to be on the team. And the vets are great with the rookies. The coaches are great, welcoming. And it's just a big DC Diva. It's more than football. It's family.
It's family. And I want to remind people, this is, I mean, we're seeing it. This is full on contact. You've got pads everywhere. There is
study and we live the life of a football player.
So what's the future? I mean, I know you guys have been trying to work with the NFL, right, and kind of even grow this league even more.
Absolutely. So we've recently launched a petition, just looking for support in general for women's football. We are making history, really. And when I was 6 or 7 years old, whenever I was asked, what did I want to be when I grew up, I always said I wanted to be in the NFL. And granted, I'm living my dream with the WFA, but here we are 30 years later, and a WNFL still doesn't exist. So the time is now.
You hearing that, Roger Goodell? The time is now. Now, of course, the thing about being athletes and being on a team, you've got your family together, but it's not just about what's happening on the field. I mean, you guys are nonstop in the community, right?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. We are, for us, we're so grateful to have the support that we've had over the years from our fans, our friends, our families, that we want to pay that forward and be there for our community. So we've done things like holiday cards and Valentine cards for senior citizens and our heroes at Walter Reed. We volunteer at animal shelters. We're all over the place.
Do you feel like, because we have the women's football league, and then there was that short-lived lingerie football league that kind of, I mean, do you feel like people are starting to really get and understand, like, we are hardcore ladies here?
I do think so.
Yeah, I think people are starting to come around, but I think some people still in the back of their head are like, there shouldn't be
women can't play football.
I mean, it's come a long way. I used to get asked, "Oh, you're a cheerleader," or "Oh, you play lingerie," and nowadays it's a little bit more of, "Oh, you play for the Divas," and we're 3-time national champions, so people respect that.
All right, so April 14th.
13th.
April
St.
13th.
James. Yep.
All right, get out to the St. James. A perfect chance to see the Divas and to see the new St. James facility.
Yes.
Ladies, best of luck this season.
We want you to be our
Your honorary captain?
Yes.
Thank you, lady. I would love to. I want to be a diva with you guys.
Divas.
All right, we'll be back with more. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Eating out at dozens of local restaurants means thousands of residents suffering from HIV and cancer. Coming up, we'll have a tasty recipe that will be featured in the Food and Friends Dining Out for Life campaign.
With Persona Doctors, you'll want to eat less, so you'll medications that curb your appetite, burn fat, boost your energy with natural hormones that keep the weight off. It'll change your life, guaranteed.
Guaranteed results. You have nothing to lose but the weight.
Tired of the winter blues? Need a break from your daily grind? Ready to press pause and make time for you? South Carolina and let the calming surf, soft sand, and warm sun do the work. With amazing deals all along the coast, it's the perfect time for a seaside getaway. So make time for you. Visit Myrtle Beach, where happiness comes in waves.
With Cox, you can watch all your movies and shows, whatever the weather. With DirecTV, heavy rain or snow can affect your signal. It's clear that Cox is the better choice. Makeup artists...
Mic check. Member mic check. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mic check. Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right up on the mic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Persona Doctors, we help people lose weight and change lives. We prescribe safe, powerful medications that curb your appetite, burn fat, boost your energy, with natural hormones that keep the weight off. Guaranteed.
Book now and get our most powerful fat burner shot free.
Tune in every Sunday morning at 6:30 for Change Point, and come see us at the 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock service in Mitchellville, Maryland. I'm Pastor Jack Morris.
Well, welcome back to Great Day. 75 area restaurants are participating in this year's Dining Out for Life, and the proceeds provide home-delivered meals for those in our area facing AIDS, HIV, cancer, and other serious illnesses. Here with more is Amanda Nover from Food and Friends and Chef Eric McCamey. Frenchies, welcome to Great Day.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, Amanda, I'm so glad delicious meals to people who can't feed themselves. Tell me more about how this event supports your efforts.
Exactly. So Food and Friends is an amazing community nonprofit, as you said, that provides home-delivered meals for people in our community who are sick. And so Dining Out for Life brings together about 70 area restaurants that are all donating a portion of sales next Thursday, April 4th, to support Food and Friends.
I love this because we're also fortunate sometimes to go out and eat at great restaurants, but we have brothers and sisters and neighbors in our area in need, and you can help them just by dining out at a place like Frenchie's. And Chef Eric, I hear you make a mean tartare. Tell us about this.
It's not bad. So it's hand chopped, dry aged eye of round, which comes from the leg, and we toss this with more of like a vinaigrette as opposed to a mayonnaise base, which a lot of traditional French bistros do. So you've got anchovy, garlic chive, some pickled sea beans, and some Peruvian peppers with radish in there as well to finish it. So,
okay, so this is the radish. This doesn't look like a normal radish.
So that's a purple daikon radish.
Okay.
So we get that from one of the farms we deal with. One of the main farms we deal with is our own farm, Ewell Natural Farm, and then I also get from some of the Amish co-ops.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, now what are these little doodads here? I feel like I'm so uninformed with culinary excellence.
I tend to use some esoteric ingredients sometimes.
Okay.
So you've got pickled Peruvian peppers here, and then pickled sea beans here. So these are also called sweetie drops. They're a little piquant, but they're mostly sweet. They have a nice texture. And the sea beans are naturally salty from growing in the ocean, and then just pickled with some white wine vinegar.
Peruvian pickled peppers are a little piquant. Did y'all get that? All right, so how would you plate this?
So in the restaurant we do it, a little fancy with like the ring mold, but like if I was gonna do this at home, like I kind of do more of like a free form. Like I'll just put it on the plate or in the bowl, however much we're gonna eat. Like if I was at home, I'll just be eating this right out of the bowl. I wouldn't even plate it.
I know that's right? So, turn the TV up and indulge.
Yeah, but we just garnish it with like some radish, finish it with some coarse salt. And then at the restaurant we use microgreens, but like just getting some like nice watercress or something for home is good. And then just finish it with like a nice olive oil. Eat it straight up, eat it with bread, eat it with French fries. It's all good.
I love how honest you are. You're like, if I was at home, man, I would just dig in. Amanda, that's what it's all about, right? The beautiful meals that you make are part of the beautiful meals that you make, and that's the connection.
Yep. Food and Friends was actually started in 1988 when restaurants began donating food for us to deliver to our clients at the time. And although things have changed since then, we still have such amazing relationships with the restaurant and the food and beverage industry. And so we're just so pleased to partner with about 70 area restaurants for this event.
I love it. We're in the nation's capital. There are so many people who are fortunate, but it breaks my heart every time I drive down the street and I see people who are living on the streets or they're living a hard life. And this is a way that we can give back if we have more to give. So you see the details on your screen. Please support this effort, Dining Out for Life. Check out foodandfriends.org for more. And now we're going to toss it out to Andy at the St. James. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so baseball season is here, right? So a lot of people are excited about that, especially opening day, Nats Park tomorrow. But today, baseball is in full swing at the St. James. So we've got Jake Moon here. He oversees the baseball and the softball department. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you here.
Thanks for coming.
And, this is an incredible facility. What all can you guys do here that maybe you couldn't do, say, in a typical outside field?
Well, we can do pretty much every part of the game here, which is the amazing part about this. Outside of being on a field, we really do a lot of player development, and we have players on programs through our high performance center. So the strength, the conditioning, the nutrition part of what an athlete should be doing to grow and grow their abilities, grow their potential, is what we do maybe outside of the field, but we can also replicate the field here, which is an awesome option to have.
And that's what's really neat about it, too. Now, there's some technology here. You guys have state-of-the-art technology that even like the pros would use to gauge their progress. So I'm going to step off here, and I know you're going to go around here and you're going to pitch.
Yep.
And tell me what numbers, what you're looking for, what we're going to see as we enter this process.
So with the Rapsodo, we're going to, number one, just see how far the ball's going, the ball exit speed. A lot of scouts are looking for guys that can reach certain ball exit speed. So we're trying to put players on a path to increase their ball exit speed. We're looking at his launch angle as he swings to see how high he's hitting that ball, how much carry he would have on it.
Nice. Look good to me. And then we can see.
And as you can see from the display, once it reads, he missed hit that one a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's showing, its general distance and its ball flight.
That's cool. So we can get another one. And see what the speed is there. So this is a tool, though. This is something that's great also if you have a young ball player in the family who wants to just increase their skills and see where they are. Watch the growth. That's what this tool's used for.
Definitely, yes. We track their progress every time they come in to hit, and we keep it in a cloud database too. We can track their progress and make sure they're improving.
So cool. All right, so we're going to stick around here. We're going to go to the batting cages next. I don't know, we might see if Dave, the man behind the camera, wants to give it a go. We're back with more right after this, live from the St. James.
Looking for a career in social action and environmental change? Coming up, we'll have information on a 2-day conference and career fair to help you find your passion and the perfect job in the field. After the break.
Your best friends. They deserve the love and care just like any other member of the family. Learn more about keeping your pets happy and healthy at WUSA9.com/pets. Your best friends. Sponsored by Friendship Hospital for Animals.
Is your house less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home. Don't make repairs, don't pay commissions, and don't wait another day. We'll get you the cash you need. No agent fees, no closing costs. We'll even help you pack and move for free. For a no-obligation offer, call 301-799-SELL. That's 301-799-7355. Or visit marketprohomebuyers.com. We buy houses as is, on your schedule. Call today.
If you need to replace your windows or patio doors, Renewal by Andersen is having one of their best sales. But this sale lasts only 31 days. Before March 31st, buy one window or patio door, get your next one 40% off. And as a bonus, get an additional $100 off every window and patio door with zero money down, zero monthly payments, and zero interest for a year. Renewal by Andersen, the replacement windows that homeowners really want, are now even more affordable. Before March 31st, buy one window or patio door, get your next one 40% off, and get this sale bonus. Get an additional $100 off every window and patio door with incredible financing too. Zero money down, zero monthly payments, and zero interest for a year. Renewal by Andersen's 31-day sale ends March 31st. For an appointment during our sale, call 1-800-338-4949.
Mesothelioma. It's all we do. With 9 offices across the country, we are large enough to take on big corporations. There is no risk. Let us come meet with you.
We only take mesothelioma claims. Call us at 1-800-400-6731 or go to mesobook.com.
Our experience and the size of our law firm makes a difference. Call us at 1-800-400-6731 or visit mesobook.com.
Have you been injured in an accident because somebody wasn't paying attention on the highway?
When you've been injured by a careless driver, you have a lawyer.
That's right. When you need a lawyer, you have a lawyer. No matter what kind of accident you've been in, call us at Science and Kirk or go to youhavealawyer.com.
Welcome back. The new Green Deal proposed by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is scheduled to be presented to the Senate this week.
And if you are interested in a career in the socially conscious green movement, but you don't know where to start, there's actually a 2-day conference and job fair that is also this week. So here to talk more about that is president and co-founder of Mobilize Green, Leah Allen, and student participant at the University of Maryland, Sophia Fenton. Welcome.
Thank
you,
guys.
Thank you. All right, Leah, so we hear so much about green and being green conscious, but what is Mobilize Green?
So Mobilize Green was founded a while ago to jumpstart green careers for young kids who wanted to change the world. There was a place we wanted to create an opportunity for them to come together, to network, to find opportunities. And we really focus on kids who actually don't have access to these opportunities. So we recruit from around the country, and we bring them and connect them with employers and opportunities. And so it really makes a difference for young people who don't have access.
And this annual conference, the timing couldn't be better with the voting of the new Green Deal. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so Mobilize Green is not a political organization, so we're nonpartisan. But the Green New Deal, young people are interested in it. They're excited about it. when they come here to Washington, we're going to have a reception on Capitol Hill, and they'll get to see both sides and perspectives on the Green New Deal so they can look at policy issues.
So, Sophia, you're a public policy major. So, why we talk about environmental equity and diversity? Why is that so important to you? Why has this been kind of your focus?
Sure, no problem. So, as a public policy major, I really understand the value in having a seat at the table where the decisions are made, and especially in sustainability. These are not going to be the type of solutions that can just be implemented in any community at any time in their standard form. So you really have to have that diverse group at the table where the decisions are being made, because you need that full input to tweak every single solution.
Interesting. I was just reading some Nielsen research, and it said women of color care more about sustainability, all natural products, then, there's just like a very high amount of women of color who care about these issues. But when you think about the person who has that seat at the table, we're not represented, and I'm not sure why that is.
Well, it's a complicated issue. One, there's access to opportunities, there's going to the right, getting the right majors. It's a variety of things, but that's why we're trying to break down those barriers and bring people in so that they can have access.
This is all of our issues as humans on this planet.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
You have that commitment to diversity that's really sets you apart from everybody else.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the future workforce, it's going to be millennials. Actually, millennials make up the largest segment. But really, within that, actually, young people of color actually make up a growing segment. And so that's why we just think it's very important to make sure.
So we talk about the diversity, but then we recently had the government shutdown. Were you guys affected by that?
Wow, that was one of the toughest things we went through as an organization. But the young people were really struggling. They were struggling financially. They were also struggling with, is this something I want to go through again? Some were disillusioned with government. We had a young woman who literally, her brother was in the hospital with third-degree burns. She didn't know if she could make her rent. And it was really a very harrowing experience. And so we were able to step in and really help. But that's a challenging thing. We want young people to know that government service is noble and a good cause. And so that was important for us.
Absolutely. And you can go, and citizens are the best lobbyists, and you can go change the world. You really can.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your work in the community and the country. The details of the conference are on your screen. Make sure you check it out, and we'll be back with more Great Day after this.
Futures, right?
Coming up, we are live from the St. James. We're talking baseball season. That's cameraman Dave there getting a couple of hits. We're back with more right after this.
The NCAA men's basketball tournament is underway on WUSA 9. Check your bracket. Just go to WUSA9.com/bracket challenge to see if you still have a chance to win $1,500.
CBS Tonight. From LeBron James comes the biggest reality competition ever attempted. To win, run a mile through the streets of LA. But here's the catch. You'll be chased by an elite athlete. If they catch you, you're out. But if you go all the way, you win $1 million.
Sounds like my kind of game.
$1 Million Mile premieres CBS Tonight after Survivor.
Are you considering replacing your heating and air conditioning system? Now is the perfect time with ARS Rescue Rooter. Get up to $1,450 back when you purchase a select home comfort system from ARS. Visit arsofvirginia.com.
Call ARS and Rescue Rooter. If you've been injured and you're looking for a law firm, look no further. 5-star Google reviews are pouring in for Chase and Boscolo. Comments like
courtesy,
respect,
communication,
hard work, results. That's what makes Chase and Boscolo one of the DC area's top-rated law firms. When injuries change your life, call the lawyers that care. Call Chase and Boscolo, 1-800-728-5898.
Update your floors with Empire Today's $50 room sale. Buy one room, get floors for all other rooms for just $50 each. So when you buy one room, it's only $50 for laminate in the kitchen, $50 for carpet in the bedroom, and $50 for hardwood in the office. There's no limit. Buy one room, and it's $50 for floors in each additional room. Schedule now.
800-588-2300 Empire.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Tate, and I have lost 78 pounds in 93 days with Dr. Corey Aflin's weight loss program. I have more energy now than I've ever had before. I can go back and wear my old clothing. I no longer have any hypoglycemic episodes. episodes like I once had.
Hi, I'm Dr. Aplin. To find out how you can lose up to a pound of fat per day, call this number right now for your no-obligation consultation.
Schedule your annual AC tune-up now with ARS Rescue Rooter for only $59. But do it fast. This $59 AC tune-up special ends soon. Visit arsofvirginia.com.
Call ARS and Rescue Rooter.
Welcome back. We are going to head back out to Springfield, Virginia, where Andy is at a state-of-the-art sports facility.
That's right. It's all on the heels of opening day at Nats Park tomorrow. Good morning, Andy.
Hey, good morning. That's right. Everybody's excited about baseball season here in Washington, D.C. Finally kicking off. I guess you could say kicking off. That's fine. Okay, so this guy, Jake Moon, one of the directors here of baseball. This is neat because this provides an area of consistency for young athletes.
Yes. Yep. The hitting house is always available for anyone. It's open to the public to drop in and hit for 15 minutes. Just maybe get a little bit of work in because we're looking to build consistency with our hitters of hitting, as daily if possible. But then also, a dad and a son can come in here for an hour, rent a cage, and kind of hang out. And I'm usually here, or one of my trainers is here.
Totally. Great play. You can even make memories here. We're going to make a memory right now. So, guys, this is cameraman Dave. That's right. I work with this guy 5 days a week. He's the man, the best in the business. So we're going to step back here because we're going to let Dave get a couple of hits off. So this machine, though, I know you guys at home can't see it. All you can see is Dave. But you can control the speed here, right? So
yes.
Are we going to send these like 100 miles an hour to him or
no,
what?
Not for Dave yet. Okay. We're going to keep it kind of just nice and easy. Here it is, hit it. But yes, you can increase it up. I've had it as high as 97 miles per hour. Every type of pitch, slider, curveball.
All right, let's see. So, and you can adjust the time in between the hits as well, right?
Yes, yep.
Whoa! Okay, that's what happened. See, I smarted off. Now he's sending them down my way. So ideally, if you're in a batting cage, do you want to have a coach around, someone that can help offer up pointers?
Yes, you want to have a coach there or be taking video of yourself if you're a younger player on your own, just so you can verify that what you think you're doing, you're actually doing, and what you're trying to work on, you're accomplishing.
Sounds good. All right, so we can turn this off. Woo! All right, he got a hold of that one because we're going to step out here now and can't really talk to Dave because he's not Mike. But Dave, you did a great job. I'm so glad it was you instead of me because he was already warmed up. So, but anyway, if people want more information, they want to come out here, they want to up their game, what do they need to do to get started?
They can go to our website, www.stjames.co.
All right.
There's baseball under sports. Click, and my email's there. You can reach out to me, and I can answer any questions.
TheSt.James.co. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it. All right, Dave, you did a great job.
You
Let's
did
get back
a
to
great
the ladies
job.
in the studio.
That was hilarious.
He's brave. He was brave.
Was that Dave's Great Day debut? Is that his first time on the show?
It may have been. From behind the camera, no pressure, right?
I'm glad he got a hit.
Get out there, check it out. We will see you tomorrow. Make it a great day.
Mesothelioma. It's all we do. With 9 offices across the country, we are large enough to take on big corporations. There is no risk. Let us come meet with you.
We only take mesothelioma claims. Call us at 1-800-400-6731 or go to mesobook.com.
Our experience and the size of our law firm makes a difference. Call us at 1-800-400-6731 or visit mesobook.com.
CBS Tonight. Get your game face on. Go! First, a survivor clash. 6 exiled castaways will battle back for one spot in the game.
Whatever is in the tank, you need right now.
Then, from LeBron James, it's not just a race. It's a chase with punishing obstacles through the streets of L.A.
Sounds like my kind of game.
Tim Tebow hosts the world premiere of $1 Million Mile after an epic new Survivor, CBS Tonight.
Is your house less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home. Don't make repairs, don't pay commissions. For a no-obligation offer, call 301-799-7355 or visit marketprohomebuyers.com.
Have you been hurt in a car accident?
Motorcycle accident?
Or
less than perfect? I'm Dan from Market Pro Home Buyers, and we want to buy your home.
Market Pro home buyers gave us a fair offer and truly helped my family.
Call us today at 301-799-7355.
From LeBron James,
Victory's only a mile away.
$1 Million Mile premieres tonight.
Rise to declare recesses of the subcommittee at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on lost Einsteins, lack of diversity in patent inventorship, and the impact on America's innovation economy. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first hearing in the 116th Congress of the House Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. I'm proud that we begin our committee's work on a topic that is of paramount importance to the future of our country, ensuring that everyone has the same equality of opportunity to participate in our nation's innovation economy, a right so important that it is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Our longstanding commitment to the innovation economy has made the United States a world superpower. We have a duty to ensure that everyone has an equal chance to participate fairly in this vibrant part of our economy without misuse or abuse. Women, minorities, and other underrepresented groups of people should not be excluded from the patent system or face unnecessary barriers. Moreover, if we are to stay the world leader, we cannot afford to leave innovative talent behind. As the Subcommittee on Intellectual Property, we come at this question from a particular angle, looking at who is named as inventors on U.S. patents. Because the first Patent Act passed in 1790, shortly after this country's founding, we have a large documentary history of data to use. The good news is that this data shows that the patent system has long played a role in enabling marginalized but ambitious and inventive people the ability to participate in the innovation economy through the receipt of a patent. For example, while the majority of African Americans were still enslaved, the first patent believed to be awarded to an African American was in 1821 to Thomas L. Jennings for his new method of dry cleaning clothes. Another example, well before women obtained the right to vote, the first patent believed to be awarded to a woman was in 1793 to Hannah Wilkinson Slater for her new method of producing cotton sewing thread. The bad news, however, is that in modern times, data shows that there has not been a good track record of progress towards having equal protection from these groups in the patent system. The USPTO's recent report on gender diversity shows that even today, the total number of inventors who are women in the United States is only 12%. It has not substantially increased over the last 15 years. For other underrepresented groups, collecting data on patenting has been more challenging. The USPTO does not collect demographic data on who applies for patents. In the gender space, researchers have often relied upon algorithms to estimate if an inventor if an inventor's name is male or female. This is not a perfect approach, but it is even harder for researchers to associate inventor data with other demographics such as race or ethnicity. I'm pleased that one of our witnesses today, Professor Lisa Cook, has nonetheless conducted research on how many African Americans are named as inventors on patents. This body of work, including Professor Cook's research, documents that there is underrepresentation here as well. I look forward as well to hearing from the rest of the accomplished witnesses on this panel about their own stories of being a woman, or a minority in fields where they might have had few peers who look like them. I want to understand the challenges they faced and their ideas for improvement, and indeed where they have already taken steps to improve participation, like former USPTO Director Michelle Lee's All-In STEM initiative to address gender diversity. Congress has certainly taken notice of this issue before. I was proud in the last Congress to work with the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, and other members of this committee on the passage of the Success Act, which called for the USPTO to put together a comprehensive survey on patenting by women, minorities, veterans, and low-income individuals. But it also seems that there is much more that we can do, and I hope to learn more about potential steps we can take from our witnesses as well. I've often heard, for example, that many from underrepresented groups leave STEM fields once they are in them because they find themselves in an unwelcoming work environment. Research shows that this is just one of many reasons why there might be underrepresentation, and there's no doubt that this is a complicated issue, but it's also critically important. I think the title of the hearing speaks directly to this, Lost Einsteins. When women and minorities are not in the innovation pipeline, or if they leave because they don't feel welcome, we are losing sources for increased innovation. We are leaving talent on the table, and frankly, we are leaving talent behind. The lack of diversity calls into question whether there is an equal opportunity for all of these underrepresented groups to live up to their full potential if being an inventor or an innovator is what they want to do. I believe we can and should do better. Thank you, and I look forward to your testimony, and it is now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Alabama, Ms. Roby, for her opening statement.
I thank the chairman, and I thank all of the witnesses for being here with us today. Patents are one of the key drivers of innovation in this country, and by protecting inventions from theft, they provide the incentive necessary for individual inventors and small and large companies alike to invest the time and resources needed to develop life-saving and life-enhancing products, and helps the United States maintain its position in the world, as the world's undisputed innovation leader. To realize our full potential, America needs to tap into the inventive genius found in the great minds of all our citizens. Great minds like that of NASA chemist Barbara Askins, a graduate of the University of Alabama and a Huntsville resident, who in 1978 was recognized as the first National Inventor of the Year. Ms. Askins invented the audio radiograph technology to create very high contrast images used in space photography and to vastly improve X-ray images. She was the sole inventor on the project and alone received a patent. Unfortunately, while U.S. women earn almost half of all the undergraduate degrees in science and engineering and 39% of all new PhDs in those fields, even today, they are not receiving a proportionate share of patents. The USPTO's recent study on the issue found that in 2016, a woman was named on only 21% of all patents granted, and women inventors made up only 12% of all inventors. It concluded that gains in participation in science and engineering occupations and entrepreneurship are not leading to significant increases in women inventors receiving patents. We have to do a better job of unlocking this potential to both help all of our citizens enjoy the fruits of their labor while also helping the U.S. to maintain its position as the technology leader. To that end, just last year, this committee passed a bill that was signed into law with that goal in mind. The Success Act instructed the USPTO to work with the Small Business Administration to study the issue and report to Congress on recommendations for promoting the participation of women, minorities, and veterans, both in entrepreneurship and in applying and obtaining patents. I look forward to receiving that report and its recommendations. Today, we all look forward to hearing from our esteemed witnesses on their experiences with the patent system and how our great female minds value the patent system, but have experienced challenges fully participating in it, and their recommendations on what can be done to promote the creation of new inventions by women and minorities and the patenting of those inventions. So again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you again, all of the witnesses, for appearing here today. And we look forward to not only your testimony, but having the opportunity to engage with each of you. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Roby. I am now pleased to recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing to investigate why there is a lack of diversity among patent holders in the United States. Unlike many issues in Congress, there is bipartisan agreement on the need to protect American intellectual property and to foster innovation. So many entrepreneurs today rely on intellectual property to fuel their businesses, and these businesses are increasingly the engine of economic growth in our nation. Statistics underscore how important IP is to our economy. In 2016, the U.S. Commerce Department reported that IP-intensive industries contributed more than $6 trillion of value to the U.S. gross domestic product. With so much of our economy dependent on IP-related industries, it is critical that everyone share in the economic opportunities these industries offer. Promoting greater inclusion in the innovation ecosystem is good for our economy, good for underserved communities, and good for all Americans. Unfortunately, research shows that many segments of our society continue to be underrepresented as inventors on patents. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's recent report on gender diversity finds that women are very much underrepresented as patent holders. Analyzing data on U.S. patents granted between 1976 and 2016, the report shows that women comprised only 12% of the named investors on patents in 2016, representing an increase of only 2% over the last 16 years. Clearly, whatever progress is being made is happening far too slowly, and much needs to be done to promote greater gender diversity among inventors. Moreover, the USPTO's research shows that the underrepresentation in patenting is not solely a function of women entering science and engineering fields at lower rates than men, although that continues to be a problem. In 2015, women comprised nearly 28% of the total science and engineering workforce, but only 12% of inventors granted patents. Even when women are in the fields most associated with patenting, they are not patenting at the same rate as their male colleagues. This shows that the gender gap in patenting is likely to be caused by many factors, not just because there are fewer women scientists and engineers. Unfortunately, because the USPTO does not collect demographic data on inventors, it has been more challenging to study racial and ethnic diversity among U.S. inventors. Nonetheless, the studies that have been done also show significant disparities in patenting rates along racial and ethnic lines. I hope to learn more from the witnesses about how we can improve data collection on this issue and learn more about the causes of these disparities, since the first step towards solving the problem is understanding its scope and root causes. For example, one study found that exposure to innovation during childhood has a major impact on an individual's desire to become an inventor, and that a child's likelihood of becoming an inventor increases if he or she grows up in one of our country's technology hubs. I am proud that New York City, where my district is located, counts as one of these hubs, and I hope we can figure out how to replicate this sort of inventive environment elsewhere throughout the United States. As the title of this hearing suggests, there may be many lost Einsteins in our country. The loss in economic value and innovation, to say nothing of the missed opportunities for these individuals who are left behind, presents a significant challenge that must be addressed. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, not just about the barriers that underrepresented groups may face in the innovation ecosystem, but also about how we can begin to address this serious problem. We can and we must do better, and that starts with hearings like this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Michelle K. Lee is the former director of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and former Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property. In that role, Mrs. Lee was the principal advisor to the President through the Secretary of Commerce on domestic and international intellectual property policy matters and is the first woman to serve as the director of the PTO, USPTO, in the country's 220-plus year history. She is also a veteran of Silicon Valley, experienced in scaling fast-growing companies with disruptive technologies, and an expert in intellectual property. She was the Deputy General Counsel for Google, and before that worked at the law firm of Fenwick and West, LLP. She currently serves as a public company board of directors for Alarm.com, a provider of a cloud-based software as a service solution. Before building her legal career, Mrs. Lee worked as a computer scientist at Hewlett-Packard Research Laboratories, as well as at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. She holds a BS and also an MS in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from MIT, as well as a JD from Stanford Law School. Professor Lisa D. Clark teaches at both James Madison College and in the Department of Economics at Michigan State University. After receiving a BA from Spelman College, she was a Marshall Scholar at Oxford University, where she obtained a BA in philosophy, politics, and economics. She received a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and was a postdoctoral fellow and visiting assistant professor at the Kennedy School of Government and deputy director for Africa Research at the Center for International Development at Harvard University. Her current research interests include the economics of intellectual property rights, economic growth and development, financial institutions and markets, and economic history. Dr. Cook is the author of a number of published articles, books, chapters, and working papers, and has edited and contributed to the Harvard World Economic Forum Global and Africa Competitiveness Reports. Dr. Ayanna Howard is a professor and chair of the School of Interactive Computing at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She is also the Chief Technology Officer of Zyrobotics. She has made significant contributions in the technology areas of artificial intelligence, computer vision, and robotics. Her published research numbers over 250 peer-reviewed publications. Her accomplishments have been highlighted through a number of awards and articles, as well as being named an MIT Technology Review Top Young Innovator and recognized as one of the 23 most powerful women engineers in the world by Business Insider, as well as one of the top 50 U.S. women in tech by Forbes. Prior to Georgia Tech, Dr. Howard was a senior robotics researcher and a deputy manager at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Dr. Howard received her BS from Brown University, her MSEE from the University of Southern California, her PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Southern California, and her MA from Claremont University Drucker School of Management. Susan M. Armstrong is a senior vice president in engineering at Qualcomm. She started at Qualcomm working on Global Star and then early CDMA base station projects. She was a pioneer in bringing internet protocols to the cellular industry, resulting in the first web surfing on a cellular phone in 1997 and Qualcomm's commercialization of packet data in 1998. Since then, she has held various leadership positions, first as the head of software engineering in Qualcomm's mobile chipset division, and then as the head of worldwide customer engineering, the group that integrates and commercializes the company's products in phones and other wireless devices. Recently, Ms. Armstrong has joined Qualcomm's Government Affairs group, where she brings an engineering and product background to policy work. Prior to joining Qualcomm in 1994, Ms. Armstrong worked for 10 years at the Xerox Systems Development Department and the Xerox Webster Research Center. Ms. Armstrong holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo. And I hope that I got that name right, Qualcomm? Okay, thank you. We welcome all of our distinguished witnesses and thank you all for participating in today's hearing. Before proceeding with testimony, I hereby remind each witness that all of your written and oral statements made to this subcommittee in connection with this hearing are subject to penalties of perjury pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, which may result in the imposition of a fine or imprisonment of up to 5 years or both. Please note that each of your written statements will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony, and when the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Once again, I thank you all for being here, and Mrs. Lee, you may begin. And if you would turn on your microphone. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Roby, and members of the subcommittee. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, and thank you for hosting a hearing on such an important topic. Invention is a cornerstone of America's continued economic prosperity and well-being. Our world faces numerous challenges, including global warming, food insecurity, and cybersecurity, but also a number of attractive opportunities, including finding new cures for diseases and providing greater mobility for those with disability. But solving those problems will require all the talent and all the ingenuity that we can muster. Yet, when it comes to technological innovation, we are rowing with one hand behind our back. We've all seen the numbers. The percentage of women who are awarded patents in the US is extremely low, anywhere from 12 to 21%, depending upon the study and depending upon how you count. And one recent study indicated that at this rate, it would take 118 years for us to reach parity in gender in terms of patenting. Why are the numbers so low? Number one, fewer girls and fewer women pursue STEM careers, and even those that do face high attrition rates. There are a myriad of reasons for this, including differences in upbringing, societal expectations, fewer role models, unconscious bias, and even images in the media. Both these factors contribute to the low numbers in terms of women patent inventors. If you think about it, in order to earn a patent, you have to have a pretty good understanding of your field, the technology, and how a product or an invention or a process works. And then you have to come up with an insight that no one else has ever thought about how to make it better, faster, cheaper, more cost-effective. And these insights don't often come to you in your first several years of practice in the profession. So to the extent that women are leaving STEM careers earlier and at faster rates, that negatively impacts their patenting numbers. Another contributing factor is the way organizations solicit invention disclosures. Based upon my experiences as in-house counsel, there are generally two ways. First is a voluntary inventor-initiated submission. And second is a manager-initiated brainstorming session inviting the relevant team members to brainstorm to harvest the inventions. The latter method, manager-initiated brainstorming sessions, tended to be much more productive in terms of getting invention disclosures from women. Left to their own devices, women tended to discount the novelty and usefulness of their inventions and were less willing to dedicate the time to submit an invention disclosure and to process the patent application, and viewed such activities as extracurricular professional activities. This has implications on our economy. IP-intensive industries support 1/4 of all jobs in the US and make up 1/3 of our gross domestic product. So what can we do? Personally, as a woman who has spent her career in tech, and as the first woman head of the United States Patent and Trademark Office in our country's 200-plus-year history, I felt a heightened calling to address some of the problems I had seen. This led me to launch, as Chairman Johnson said, the first all-in STEM initiative at the PTO. Its purpose to encourage more girls and more women to pursue STEM education so that they could become inventors, STEM leaders, and entrepreneurs. Programs included Camp Invention to teach our kids to design and build and create, a Girl Scout intellectual property patch to teach our young girls about IP and invention, workshops for women inventors and entrepreneurs so that they know of the resources and they have the support they need to carry out their work. But there are ways that all of us can contribute. In-house Patent Counsel can measure and track the relevant statistics and be thoughtful on how invention disclosures are gathered. We can all be conscious of the disparate ways in which we raise our boys and girls, from the toys they play with to the activities they pursue to our expectations of them. We can broaden the image of inventors by sharing stories of successful women inventors, mentoring students in STEM to the maximum interest and potential of these individuals. And within organizations that hire STEM talent, try to find ways to reduce unconscious bias and to recruit and retain these women. And if in alignment with your organization's priorities, including patenting as a factor to consider in the promotion and tenure decisions. I am not advocating for gender parity in patenting numbers simply for the sake of achieving parity. Rather, I believe we need to nurture, develop, and harness all of our nation's technical, innovative talents in whatever shape, age, gender, background, or other demographic in which it may come. As the title of your hearing suggests, our society and world cannot afford to leave behind any future Einsteins. Thank you. I'd be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you. Professor Cook, you may begin.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Roby, and eminent members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about lost Einsteins, lack of diversity in patent inventorship, and the impact on America's economy. While we have my cousin, Percy Levon Julian, to thank for cortisone, which he developed in the 1950s, it was difficult living and being an African-American inventor at that time. His home in Oak Park, Illinois, was firebombed twice. We as a society have made progress since that time, but invention and innovation could be more inclusive and beneficial to everyone as a result. Unequal access to invention and innovation can lead to suboptimal outcomes for individuals and for the economy as a whole. My research with Concharan offers evidence that women and underrepresented minorities are less likely to participate in invention and innovation at each stage of the inventive process: education and training, the practice of invention, and commercialization of invention. For women and minorities, or would-be participants in this category, this can result in an earnings, income, and employment wealth gap. For the economy as a whole, this can result in lower output and living standards. My and others' research calculates that the size of the economy could be 3 to 4% higher if women and underrepresented minorities were included in the innovative process from beginning to end. That is, living standards could be higher for all Americans with a more inclusive, innovative economy. My research was the first study to systematically examine racial and gender gaps in invention and innovation. Allow me to say a little about my and related research. In the early stages of education and training in STEM fields, women and underrepresented minorities lag in participation in nearly every STEM field. In 2014, women were awarded 35% of bachelor's degrees in STEM fields and 16 to 17% of those in computer science and physics, and 23% of doctoral degrees in engineering. For African Americans, this was 4% of all STEM PhD degrees. The recent literature on the gender and racial gap related to participation in STEM fields attempts to identify the factors affecting these differences, including the impact of social norms and gender stereotypes, peer effects, and professors' gender on test scores and college majors. With respect to practicing invention and creating new knowledge or products, women and African Americans not only engaged at generally lower levels than their counterparts, but they also earn less and are employed less than their counterparts. In 2010, the median salary for whites was $72,000, and for African Americans, it was $56,000, which was 78% of the median salary for whites. In 2015, the share had only moved slightly to 79%. In 2015, the median salary for men was $87,000 and $62,000 for women, which was 71% of the median male salary. Among scientists and engineers in 2015, African-American unemployment was 4.7% compared to 2.9% for whites. The unemployment rate for African-American women is nearly double that of all scientists and engineers and more than double that of white women scientists and engineers. Unemployment for underrepresented minority men was just above 4%, which is higher than that for white and Asian men and higher than the average for all scientists and engineers. A few papers in the last decade have focused on the misallocation of talent among inventors and other high-skilled workers. My research found that co-ed patent teams are more productive than single-sex male or single-sex female patent teams. Hunt, Garant, Herman, and Monroe investigate the gender gap for commercialized patents and show that the gender gap among S&E degree holders is due primarily to women's underrepresentation in patent-intensive fields and patent-intensive job tasks. They also find that closing this gap would increase U.S. GDP per capita by 2.7%. My 2018 research shows that closing that gap, using more recent data, closing that gap would be 0.6% to 4.4% higher. GDP would be 4.4% higher if more women and African Americans received STEM training and worked in related jobs. Workplace issues for women and minorities go beyond the opportunity to participate in invention and innovation. Recently, tech workers in the U.S. have demonstrated to protest sexual harassment and misconduct, lack of transparency, including forced arbitration for sexual harassment claims, workplace culture, and pay and opportunity inequality. Among the Forbes list of richest people in the world, 5 of the top 10 derive their wealth primarily from the innovative economy, and 9 tech firms last year were valued at roughly $36 billion. If the aforementioned losses to GDP were being tolerated, firms, technology officers, and patent teams are not being good stewards of America's human capital and inventive capacity. This is a classic coordination problem and market failure. Public policy can help in the research, analysis, and promotion of diverse participation in inventive activities. I look forward to talking to you more about finding the lost Einsteins, as well as the hidden figures such as Katherine Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Roby, and Full Committee Chairman Nadler. My name is Dr. Ayanna Howard, and I am Professor and Chair of the School of Interactive Computing at the Georgia Institute of Technology. I also have served as the Associate Director of Research for the Institute for Robotics and Intelligent Machines and Chair of the Robotics PhD program. From 1993 to 2005, I was at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I held the titles of Senior Robotics Researcher and Deputy Manager in the Office of the Chief Scientist. I hold a degree in engineering from Brown University, an MS and PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Southern California, and an MBA from the Drucker Graduate School of Management. My research concentrates on robotics, assistive technologies, and artificial intelligence, which has resulted in over 250 publications. In 2013, I founded Zyrobotics, a Georgia Tech spin-off company which designs AI-powered STEM tools and learning games for children with diverse learning needs. My research has been supported by various industry and government funding agencies, ranging from NASA and the National Science Foundation to the Georgia Research Alliance and Microsoft. I regularly consult and sit on the advisory boards of a number of organizations concerned with robotics, AI, and workforce development. My work has also been highlighted through a number of awards and articles, including highlights in Vanity Fair, USA Today, and Time Magazine, as well as being recognized as one of the 23 most powerful women engineers in the world by Business Insider and one of the top 50 US women in tech by Forbes. Despite all these successes, I only hold 3 patents, which will now be the subject of discussion. I like to focus on my experience with the patent system. I do consider myself an innovator and an entrepreneur. Invention is core to what I do, and yet I only hold 3 patents. Even though there has been a gain in female participation in science and engineering, findings have shown that there has been not a corresponding increase in female patent inventors. My story corroborates with this claim. My first application was filed in 2003, while I was still a graduate student, and designed an encryption system using fingerprint biometrics with a small startup company. Given that neither of us had great financial resources, we put together a patent application that was filed. We eventually dropped pursuit of the application after our patent claims were denied. After all, in the world of logic, a rejection means just that, patent denied. It wasn't until 10 years later, in 2013, that I pursued my next patent. And the only reason that came about was that I needed to submit a provisional patent in order to compete for the NSF I-Corps program, which is basically a boot camp entrepreneurship program for academics and university-derived IP. I developed at that time a device that enabled children with motor disabilities the ability to interact with tablet devices without requiring pinching, swiping, or touching. A year later, in 2013, when the provisional patent was to expire, after much discussion, Georgia Tech moved forward with filing the patent application. Although it's now 2019, almost 6 years later, it has still not been granted. So what about the other patents that have been granted? Well, I discovered a little bit of a trick. I hired a great patent lawyer. So when Zyrobotics, the Georgia Tech spin-off company, was founded, it licensed the IP from that first patent. Given that I knew to be competitive, the company had to possess its own IP, we hired an extremely talented patent attorney. Although quite expensive, we secured 2 patents within a 2-year time frame. And I finally understood how the process worked, how the back and forth dance with the patent examiner evolves, how denial really means find another way, find another way, find another way, and how persistence can eventually lead to success. Unfortunately, the price tag is not very sustainable for a startup company in the education space. I also think it's not that sustainable for an academic institution in which the return on investment is not well defined. So given my personal experience in this space, it comes as no surprise to me that women still make up a small percentage of the patent inventors. Reports state that US female-founded startups raised just 2.2% of venture capital investment in 2018. Without sufficient capital, how then would you prosecute a successful patent application given that the price tag is so high? I strongly believe, beyond educating entrepreneurs, that given the state of affairs that currently we have, a more robust pro bono patent attorney agent program for small businesses would immensely help inventors compete in this patent world. It would also help level the playing field just a bit for women and other underrepresented entrepreneurs. In closing, I appreciate the committee's attention to this topic. I stand ready to answer your questions and work with you on moving forward to help create a patent system where more researchers like myself can find success navigating the ins and outs of pursuing a patent.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Ms. Armstrong, you may begin.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Roby, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Susie Armstrong, and I'm a Senior Vice President of Engineering at Qualcomm. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on this critical topic of diversity and innovation. As the leading U.S. company engaged in foundational research and development of 5G, Qualcomm believes that diverse innovation is an imperative. We can only solve the world's toughest engineering problems if we bring together teams with different backgrounds and different perspectives. Our CEO, Steve Mollenkopf, said recently, with 5G, new and previously unsolvable problems will be solved, new generations of innovations and innovators will be born. And we need more great technology minds, and that means getting the next generation, in particular women and underrepresented communities, excited and prepared for the world to come. Since joining Qualcomm in 1994, I have held various leadership positions at the company, but first consider myself an engineer and an inventor. In my experience, invention rarely involves people working alone to develop brilliant ideas. More often, invention is a team effort that requires the creativity, the interaction, the debate, and the multiple perspectives that different collaborators bring to recognize a technical problem or opportunity. My own invention, called Simple Packet Data, allowed cellular phones to connect to the internet and resulted in the first internet surfing at the 1997 CTIA show on this phone. I created a simple way for a base station to set up a packet data call by bringing to our engineering team my background in a completely separate field, computer communications and Ethernet. That invention was impactful. 20 years later, mobile internet has revolutionized the way we communicate, paving the way for 5G and the wireless economy of the future. But not everybody has equal access to careers in innovation. Multiple studies have shown that women, people of color, and people from lower income families patent at lower rates than those are in white, male, and wealthier. At Qualcomm, given the complexity of the fundamental 5G technologies we research and develop, we must promote a culture of creativity, risk-taking, and diversity. We simply cannot afford to miss out on those engineers and inventors in underrepresented groups. We focus our efforts on 4 key areas to develop inventors both for Qualcomm and for its 5G foundational technologies, and also for the industries and applications and use cases that use that ecosystem. First, as many inventions come from the STEM fields, we believe we must encourage STEM education. To spark that interest in such invention careers, we created the Qualcomm Think A Bit Lab, a hands-on program aimed at inspiring the next generation of inventors, where students learn about 5G, the Internet of Things, tech careers, and they create their own Internet of Things invention. The response has been so positive that we have partnered with school districts, universities, and libraries to create Think A Bit labs in underrepresented communities across the nation. Second, we have examined our hiring processes, especially on-campus recruiting. Last year, we added a historically black college and university and 2 universities with high Hispanic populations to the top schools that we actively recruit at. And we also recruit at the Grace Hopper Conference for Women in Computing. We strive to send recruiting teams that reflect the excitement of wireless and semiconductor fields, reflect the existing diversity in the company and the diversity that we hope to achieve. Third, we focus on retention and new project opportunities for our diverse employees. We know from research and experience that mixed gender teams are innovative, so we strive to spread these best practices. We develop employee-led networks to promote professional development. We work on engineering the bias out of our review and project rotation systems. We strive to ensure that diverse employees have access to coaching, mentorship, and career development opportunities, and that they, in turn, pass those on. Finally, we work to create and maintain a strong culture of invention and patenting across the company. We have a strong inventor development program with both online and in-person patenting classes and encourage our patent holders to coach and mentor others. We also recognize our inventors as a way to celebrate them and encourage others. Engineers are proud to have their special badge and business cards with the inventor mark, and their status as patent holders appears in the company directory. Executives send a congratulatory letter to each inventor who obtains a patent, and we hold celebrations for inventors. In summary, it's a strategic and economic imperative for Qualcomm, for the 5G wireless ecosystem, and for the United States to ensure that inventors from all backgrounds and perspectives participate in solving these challenging engineering problems. Qualcomm is committed to ensuring that diverse people have every opportunity to bring their talents to that imperative. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong, and I want to thank all of the panelists for their testimony today. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Professor Cook, thank you for your pioneering work on how many African-American inventors there are on patents. In your opinion, is there enough data available to understand the scope of the underrepresentation of racial minorities in patenting?
There's not.
What can be done to improve data collection, and are there any actions that Congress should consider?
I think there are a few. First, I think it is imperative that we collect the data, and suggesting that this be collected separately, these demographic data being collected on gender, race, ethnicity, and so on would be, I think, would be very useful. I would add that adding veteran status and disability status would also be useful, because the literature that I've talked about was burgeoning and is burgeoning. It's just from 2010, but there's a lot less on making an inclusive economy in other ways. So yes, I think that this is a big first step in identifying African-American inventors and other inventors.
Thank you. Director Lee, do you have an opinion on that question?
I do agree that collecting the data is critically important. From my time in government and also in the private sector, there's nobody that collects data better than the government in terms of accuracy and consistency over the decades. So if the USPTO could collect demographic information, gender and so forth, ethnicity, that combined with knowing what technology area the patent is in, could give policymakers, agency leaders, private sector leaders, and academics a roadmap as to areas that are doing well, areas of improvement, and we can even compare that data to international data points, because patents from all over the world flow in through the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So that sort of insight could be very, very influential and impactful.
Thank you. This question I will pose to all 4 of the witnesses. What do you think is the biggest obstacle to getting more women and minorities to participate in the patent system? Beginning with you, Ms. Lee.
Oh, there are many. How many of our children, how many of our girls grow up dreaming to be inventors? I ask that question. How can we get more of them to? How can we give them more STEM skills, education? How can we recruit and retain? How can we give them the know-how so that once they are professionals in STEM, they know about how to obtain a patent, that it need not be as expensive as one thinks, that there are discounts that are offered to small entities and micro entities, really getting the information out there that anybody can file for a patent. As you mentioned, Chairman Johnson, you don't even have to be a freed person to get a patent. There's no age restriction, there's no gender restriction. Everybody should be able to get one, and they should know how to participate in the innovation economy.
Thank you. Professor Cook.
I think there, excuse me, there are a number of things that could be done. I'm on the board of the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation, and it has a Spark Lab. And I think that it has satellites all over the country, and it does this important work of showing students and school children how to not only invent, but to innovate. And I think this is the point at which you get in students' heads and children's heads that they can do this. And this is the research that was referenced before by Chetty et al. In terms of exposing children to innovation. I certainly think knowing an inventor, a famous inventor like Percy Julian, certainly had this primordial, or planted this primordial seed to possibly study this. So I think it's really important to do this as early as possible. I also think being vigilant with respect to making sure that the EEOC is paying attention to these issues related to workplace harassment and to discrimination. It is not just the pipeline that is the problem. What we're hearing from workers is that it is the climate that exists when they are adults. This unemployment rate, this difference, is, I think, primarily due to issues like this. So you're keeping your eye on the ball and making sure that the federal government, the agencies tasked with doing so, keep their eyes on the ball with respect to harassment and discrimination will be extremely useful.
Thank you. Dr. Howard.
So one, it has to be part of the DNA, and the way that you do that is you bring in successful women patent owners and inventors from very early on, because there's so many things that a woman entrepreneur has to deal with that patents is not in the purview. That's such a, I don't understand that value a lot of times. So by exposing early, you at least start to dig a little bit into the problem.
Thank you. Ms. Armstrong.
And I would say, I would echo what has been said along the table about the culture and getting children in minorities and girls into the STEM areas that that tend to yield in patents. I think there's also, and I think a lot of girls and minorities don't see themselves in those careers, and they don't necessarily see themselves as inventors, and they don't know anything about patents. And that actually applies, I think, also to early career women and minorities as well. Unless you're in a company that stresses patenting and invention, every company stresses creativity and ambition, but I think there's a lack of access to practical, tangible tools, perhaps pro bono work for the legal aspects of doing patents, but also in so many of these incubators that I see, there's a relatively small number that seem to have actual patenting classes or coursework to help their entrepreneurs write patents.
Thank you. We'll next hear from the ranking member. Well, actually, we will go to Mr. Chabot for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you going. I want to thank our ranking member for allowing me to go. We've got a small business committee that I'm the ranking member on after this, and so it was very kind of them to let me go. I want to thank the panel members for their excellent testimony here this morning. Really did appreciate it. As you may know, we passed some legislation. I introduced it, but there were a lot of members involved. I want to thank the chair for his involvement, and Ms. Velasquez, and Mr. Schneider, and Mr. Gomert, and a bunch of others for their involvement in it. It was called the Success Act, which basically stood for Study of Underrepresented Classes Chasing Engineering and Science Success Act. We always make these things very long names, but in essence, it called for a study within the next year on what we can do to increase women, minorities, veterans, and others in obtaining patents, because as the testimony from the witnesses was, it's very challenging to accomplish that. And so I guess my first question would be, as we're waiting for, and I'll go to you if I can, Dr. Howard, perhaps first, and our congratulations really on your hard success and being a small business owner yourself, and your years of dedication as a NASA scientist and all your other accomplishments. We commend you for that. So I'll go to you first, I guess. As we're waiting for this legislation and the study to be, the legislation's passed the House, passed the Senate, the President signed it into law, so it is the law. And it extended the patent, the fee structure for 8 years, but it also did what I just mentioned to encourage women, minorities, and veterans to be able to obtain patents themselves. As we're waiting for this study, what other things can we be doing in the meantime before the study comes back to accomplish some of those things so that folks aren't waiting for a year to get started? What would you suggest?
So there's a lot you can do with women and underrepresented entrepreneurs with boots on ground, as I say. So a lot of times we don't even know that this is an issue. I think that there's enough patent owners that would be like, I can come and I can talk to my local community, my local entrepreneurs in my area and work with them. Because we've gone through it, and so we know the pain, and we're more than willing, most of us, to come back and help the community. So some of it is making those connections.
Yeah. Thank you. And in your testimony, you mentioned that one of the things that you would suggest, obviously, get a good patent attorney, and they're expensive. You know, I wasn't a patent attorney, but I practiced law for almost 2 decades out there. Of course, I wasn't expensive, but in any of it, did charge. I mean, we charge. You know, yes, I did pro bono cases periodically, and you mentioned that it'd be great if perhaps patent attorneys would do things pro bono if we could find a way to do that. And that's great, but and some will. But if you can't get enough of them to do that, then the only other way is paying those high fees or getting somebody else to do it, which means the taxpayer, meaning we have some government program that does it. Those are tough. We got a $22 trillion debt. So what can we do about, and I'll open this up to any of the other panelists as well. If lawyers aren't going to provide free services and we don't have the money to do it at the government because we got this $22 trillion debt hanging over our heads, what can we do either to get lawyers to be more helpful or other things besides that?
So one thing, and this is just a wild suggestion. So most small businesses do have SBIR grants. Part of that is there's no way to use it for patents, or even partially for patents. And so it might be that that's part of the solution, right? Like we have this overhead, like maybe we can use some of that somehow for patents. And so, yeah, it increases it a little bit, but it's already part of the budget, it's already part of your DNA. Just a wild suggestion.
Very good. Not that wild, pretty good. Any of the other panelists? Yes.
As the lawyer on the panel and as the former head of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, there are a lot of resources that are available to inventors. And the agency, I helped launch an initiative to offer pro bono services. Of course, there's never quite enough, right, given the demand, but there are discounted fees. And I'm very proud to say that during my tenure at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, I helped launch 3 of the 4 regional offices, one in Silicon Valley, one in Denver, one in Detroit, one in Dallas. And you know what? That's getting resources out into the local community so that those individuals there can have workshop training programs, can reach out into the schools, can educate the students on what is intellectual property, who can be an inventor, what does an inventor look like. We distribute baseball, but inventor collectible trading cards at schools with images of women and minority inventors. Right? And we have workshops where people, including women workshops, where they come in, they learn the basics of intellectual property, what is a patent, trademark, copyright, trade secret, how do I figure this out, so I could be smarter so that when I engage that lawyer, I can be much more efficient, and I can even write the patent application myself, should I so choose. So there are a lot of resources that are available. There's a lot that can be done, but everybody should have access to the intellectual property system.
Thank you very much. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the gentle lady from California, Representative Zoloff.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. It's good to see you again. This is my second iteration on the PTO report on women inventors. We had the current director out at the San Jose Patent Office, and we were talking about the role we both played in making sure that office got open, and I'll tell you, it is a huge success. So thank you for the efforts that you made, and the community is very supportive. And one of the things that's so helpful is to have the patent examiners right in San Jose. I mean, the big companies can afford to send people out here to the DC area, but for the smaller inventors, the proximity is really a big deal. So it's fulfilling a good mission. You know, as I'm thinking through and thinking back on the discussion we had at the San Jose office, we're falling short in diversity from the beginning. And actually it gets worse the older people get. We've got girls coding, but the actual number of women entering computer science programs at the university level is declining. And we know we have a problem in industry as well as academia. So the question is, what can we do about that? And I don't think there's any one answer, but I do think just focusing on the role of business, because most patents are filed out of the business sector, comparing even the patent innovation in the academic setting to the business sector does not appear to be doing what it needs to do. And after the policy discussion we had in San Jose, a lot of the representatives from the companies were there saying, we need to examine our own procedures, because not only is this not good for the country, it's not good for these companies. They're losing out as well. So I'm wondering, you know, I always remember a convention I went to with my then chief of staff, who was female, at the Santa Clara County Convention, City of San Jose Convention Center. Huge, huge room. It was engineers, electrical engineers in the valley, and we walked in, and it was like a sea of men. And we looked, and there were like maybe 10 women on the thousands of engineers who kind of glommed together. And I thought, you know, you don't have to have a hostile work environment in the legal sense to not have a welcoming environment. How do we go about setting metrics to change that? I mean, we can't tell employers how to run their businesses directly, but what could we do as a Congress to kind of help companies move in a different direction? Michelle, you've been at the office, you've been at Google, you've been a patent lawyer. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you, Congressman Lofgren, and thank you also for your leadership in establishing the Silicon Valley office. That was a great partnership. I do think it is critically important that the data be gathered, because companies, even if they gather it, they sometimes don't publish it.
Right.
And if the government could gather it across the board, across the country, across all ethnicities, across all demographics, and compare that to countries across the world, I understand that in Romania, the number of researchers in engineering who are women are 44%.
Right.
So
Canada is also different. I mean, it's not about gender, it's about what we're doing.
Correct. So I think it's important to record the data, track the progress, and therefore pinpoint and focus by technology area, by industry, because it varies. In the life sciences, the numbers are higher.
Right.
In computer science, it is much lower. So let's be specific, let's be granular, and federal agencies, like I say, they collect data over decades, and it's accurate, and that's a very good starting point. So then private sector, policymakers, academics, they can all look at how to improve, where do we need to improve.
So one thing that I want to explore is, you know, as we looked at the diversity issue in Silicon Valley, in my district, we said, you know, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. I mean, you have to start measuring it, and the big companies did. I mean, Google in particular went on a huge effort. I'm not saying they've succeeded completely, but they have, on diversity and the hiring, published their data and the like. I think we have jurisdiction because of our EEOC jurisdiction to require publication of some of this data. Is that a step that the four of you would recommend?
Yes. Excuse me, if I can answer, yes, that would be a huge boon to researchers, but the way they release the data, I can't do anything with them. I can make some good charts, the charts that they make, but I can't do any sort of analysis. Typically, for race and ethnicity, for example, they're bundled into the world workforce. Women are often not divided by technical fields and other fields. And what we know is that they're typically in marketing and in human resources. So I think if you're asking the question about what we can do now, I think one of the things that we're doing in the economics profession is doing a climate survey and coming up with results that are being circulated widely. And I think it is the climate. I really think it's the climate. It's not the supply side. We figured that out. There are a lot of women who would like to be in the tech field, for example, or be an entrepreneur or an inventor. This is what I was doing at the White House when I was working on small businesses. But we don't have as much information and we don't have as much sway. And you all would with the EEOC data, for example, to do something about the climate in particular.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will next hear from the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Roby. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and again, thank you all for being with us today. I want to pick up where we left off, Director Lee. We were talking about, with my colleague, the patent pro bono program, which provides the free legal services to eligible inventors, the PTO's Pro Se Assistance Program, which allows inventors to file their own application and seek the assistance of the patent examiner to identify patentable invention, and the PTO's Law School Clinic Program, which allows supervised law students to help inventors file applications. And I guess what I want to hear from you is about, do inventors know that these programs even exist? And if more inventors were aware of these programs, would it likely result in more women and other underrepresented groups filing more patent applications? Then I would go a little bit further to say it's buried in the website. You have to go through several different clicks before you actually find this information. And so if today's hearing is about making this information more accessible, to me, on the surface, that seems like a really easy fix in terms of the USPTO making this information more readily available. So if you want to weigh in on that, that'd be great.
Well, thank you for raising the point. So I do not believe that as many people who should know about the programs do know about the programs. So there's a lot more work to be done. And one of the reasons why I was so passionate about the regional offices of the Silicon Valley U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is because we have inventors and potential inventors all over this country, and the distribution geographically of inventors is not equal. So those offices, the vision is not just to put examiners in a room and have them process patent applications. When I defined the vision for those regional offices, it was to engage with the community. Having been a user of the USPTO services for the entirety of my career, they offer all these amazing services that oftentimes people do not know about. So through the regional offices and through a lot of hard work at the headquarter office, a core part of the USPTO's work is to get the word out there about the many programs that are available and to tap communities that are underrepresented. So there's more work to be done, but there are great programs, more programs to be developed, but you really have to get the word out there.
Well, and just to reiterate the point, I mean, if expense is already an issue and traveling to the regional offices is part of the expenses associated with pursuing this, it makes sense when we all do everything on this all day long that it could be as easy as visiting the website and having access to that information. But would it make sense to take the opportunity as well, while the PTO is on campus recruiting science and engineering students, to promote the benefits of patenting by these students and to bring their attention at the same time to the existence of many of these assistance programs, so that later in life, even the students and their businesses can be PTO customers?
Absolutely. Any touch point you can have with the local communities, particularly the underrepresented ones, including at career recruiting services, or when they're in elementary school, giving them an inventor baseball card so that one day they think, there's the Patent and Trademark Office, and if I have an idea, guess what? I can file for a patent through that agency. Any touch point is good.
That's great. And then just building upon that, because you mentioned it, Dr. Howard, in your testimony, can you let us know, when did you become aware of the PTO Pro Bono program, its Law School Clinic program, and its Pro Se Assistance program?
Alas, I can say about a week ago. Actually, basically trying to figure out reading the report that came out in terms of women underrepresentation, which is, and I'm in this world, and I mentor a lot of young students, women entrepreneurs in Georgia and at Georgia Tech. And unfortunately, I didn't hear about a lot of these programs.
So I think you just put the exclamation point on my point. that someone as knowledgeable as you are didn't even know the existence of these programs. So, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest again that there are some pretty easy fixes here in terms of accessibility. If anybody else, I've got 10 seconds, wants to weigh in, but I think this is a really important point. These programs exist and can be expanded, and we ought to be looking at ways that we can do that.
I would just add that the SBIR and STTR programs are also not very known to inventors and to entrepreneurs, especially underrepresented minorities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. We will next have Representative Stanton from the great state of Arizona.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for highlighting this incredibly important topic and how if we can help to work on this issue and do better on the issue that these outstanding witnesses have discussed, how it will benefit the American economy. I'm lucky enough to represent the district that includes Arizona State University. It's ranked number 17 of all universities worldwide for U.S. patents. So in the top 20 includes MIT, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, and Harvard. So I'm extremely proud to represent an innovative community that cares so deeply about advancing ideas that will undoubtedly have a significant impact not only in Arizona but across the globe. However, we are lucky in Arizona and across the country. We are growing in diversity. It's one of our great competitive strengths. But if that's not represented in the growing number of patents, we're not doing our job. Simply not acceptable that women investors made up only 12% of all inventors on patents granted 2016. There's no good reason why leaders in our African American, Hispanic, and other minority communities, why they're so extremely underrepresented in the patent system of our country. There's no good reason why we don't do a better job of collecting information so we can provide better solutions so that the great diversity that we're lucky enough to have in our country can be better represented in our patent system. So thank you for holding this hearing to talk about these important subject matters and what we in Congress and America can do to help solve this issue. Ms. Cook, Professor Cook, I wanted to ask you a particular question. I read your testimony in advance. I hope it wasn't covered when I wasn't here, but I was mostly interested in what you indicated about the loss to the American economy. If we don't have greater diversity in our patent representation, it's not just a loss to the individual scientists, it's a loss to all of America. And I wanted a chance to maybe expound upon that point to better explain to people watching here and to Congress how this hurts the American economy.
So it's interesting that you would pick up on that. One of the most stark results that I had early on in my research was that single-sex teams were less productive than co-ed teams. And that's what I was being invited to Silicon Valley firms to talk about the most. And I think that makes the economic argument on a micro level. We're leaving, and you know economists hate to do this, we're leaving $20 bills everywhere. I would say they're Benjamins, they're not even $20 bills. Just laying them everywhere, and we're not picking them up. This is invention that is going undone. This is higher living standards that are going missed by all Americans. So we should certainly consider that from a policymaking perspective and from the work perspective, the firm's perspective, that it's not making use of this human capital and of America's inventive capacity.
I think it's a great point. America is the world's leading economy. We want to keep it that way. And working with you and others to solve this issue, to make sure that the great diversity that we're blessed to have in America is better represented in our innovation ecosystem, including in patents, that will make the American economy more competitive on a global scale. It's really important. Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Representative Stanton, could I add something to that?
Please do.
I think it's, I love the research data that shows the economic benefit, and I also think it's a very, it's a global issue, and it's a very strategic issue. If you look at the WIPO report, in Korea and China, the numbers for women patent holders are much higher and growing significantly. And I think we can't afford strategically as well to let that trend go unnoticed.
Thank you very much. I guess I still have a minute, so other witnesses, comments on the impact on the America kind of economy, that we are not doing a better job of making sure that women, people of color are more represented in the innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, just one final point is, not only is it an imperative in an increasingly competitive international landscape, but some of our most innovative companies cannot hire the technical talent they need, and they're turning overseas to fill the gaps, and they're turning to Congress to alter immigration laws and so forth. So clearly, there's an economic imperative as well as a social imperative.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. We will now hear from the great representative from Virginia, Mr. Klein, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for being here today. This has been a very interesting testimony on a very important subject. As the father of 2 7-year-old daughters, I want them to have every opportunity to succeed in whatever field they go into, and I very much encourage the foray into sciences. They're already taking coding classes in school. I couldn't even believe it in first grade that they're already teaching coding in the schools, and that's fantastic. So, but I am intrigued by the numbers, and I'm looking forward to the report because I think it will provide a little bit more information about, as you were saying, Professor Cook, about the different areas of research. And while women may make up an equal number of scientists in biological and life science fields, but not in other areas of science like engineering, I'm interested in, we've made some progress, and the PTO's recent report indicates that the percent of patents with at least one woman inventor increased from 7% in the 1980s to 21% by 2016. Would you consider that to be a positive sign, and why has the growth rate slowed since 1998 from 14% to 21% in 2016, while more and more women are entering scientific fields?
So that's a really good question, and in fact, that was the starting point of my research in 2010. I saw all of these women going into biological sciences. At the time, I was at Stanford, and I just thought there's so many opportunities in biotech. Why aren't we seeing women among the inventors? So I think that this is definitely a big issue. I think making sure that there are interesting things for your 7-year-old girls to do that are just like the things that men would like to do, boys would like to do, I think is a big deal. If we walk down the aisles of a party goods store and you're looking for items for parties, all the pink stuff is princess stuff, and all the interesting stuff, like Star Wars and having to do with innovation, is for boys. So I think we really have to start early in terms of the messages we give to students. And my professors, my colleagues who talk about having hackathons, say that women typically don't come because they don't find these interesting problems that they are trying to solve. So for all the coding that the women are learning, there are no outlets for them that they find interesting. And I'm not going to say the bar is higher for women in terms of interesting projects, but I think at least one could be sensitive to that.
And to the numbers in the recent slowing of the growth rate since 1998, do you think do you have any explanation for that? Does it have to do with developments in certain segments of the industry? What would you say to that?
I think the patent teams are getting larger, and we know that patent teams are getting larger, and I think that's just a feature of patent teams getting larger, that women happen to be on them. And I think you've just met an equilibrium, the stagnation equilibrium. But what we know from other STEM fields is that there are fewer women going into the fields and going into PhD programs. So that may be a reflection of what is happening on the front end too.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
So there was an interesting statistic that in computer science in particular, in the 80s, like in every other scientific discipline, the numbers were going up. In some areas faster than others, but in computer science, it went down. And people were asking why. And if you look back, there was an article written that at that time, the personal computer was being introduced. And affluent parents bought their sons personal computers, and they learned how to program. So when these kids then go to college and take computer science classes, if you've had experience computer programming, you're going to do pretty well in that computer science class. But if you've never touched a computer, it's going to be a lot harder. So even if you have the intention to enroll in a computer science program, when you have that first class, it is hard. So what we buy our kids in terms of toys and activities we engage them in matter tremendously. And also, if you think about it, the images in the media about that time, you know, Revenge of the Nerds, the images of computer geeks, antisocial. If you're a woman or a girl, who wants to be that? So a lot has to do with image, but a lot too has to do with the toys, the programs, the activities we give to our boys versus girls.
We're buying a lot of Legos in the house right now, but I'm also glad in culture, and I see Ms. Lofgren has stepped away, but talking about the climate, I'm glad that Captain Marvel is a woman, and that movie's coming out now, so I can't wait to take my girls to see that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Next up will be the chair of the Democratic Caucus, New York Representative, Mr. Jeffries, for 5 minutes.
I thank the distinguished chair of the IP Subcommittee and all of the witnesses for your presence here today. It seems when you address this diversity challenge that we're confronting in the STEM industry that there's a recruitment issue that is problematic that many of you have spoken to, but there's also a retention issue. And if you solve the recruitment issue but don't deal with the retention issue, you know, at the end of the day, you haven't really meaningfully addressed the problem. And you know, maybe starting with Professor Cook, but I'd be interested in everyone's perspective. What are some of the retention challenges that people of color and women face in the innovation economy?
So thank you for your question. I think that one of the things that is becoming more and more evident is that the climate and many of these patenting firms is not what it should be, and because they're demonstrating, because there are workers from these companies demonstrating, we should listen to them, and if you can do anything, have any sway over, say, the EEOC pursuing these claims, I think that would make a big difference. There has to be some outside force because they have not been able to police themselves in this way. We can make the argument, I can go to these firms and talk about the money that's being left on the table because patent teams are single sex rather than co-ed. I can talk about that. I make the profit maximization argument. But I think on the other hand, there has to be enforcement, EEOC enforcement, and there seem to be a lot of things going on that need a watchful eye.
Director Lee, can you comment on sort of the culture at these institutions that may be impacting the ability to retain talented women and or people of color?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you don't see people who look like you. And it's hard when they don't look like you in more ways than one. So to the extent, now that shouldn't stop us from, you know, inspiring those underrepresented minorities to pursue these fields, but greater networks, greater support, greater retention efforts, greater consciousness, measuring the data, focusing on areas that need improvement. It should be within the priorities of a business to want to have these diverse teams because, as Professor Cook says, I mean, diverse teams, if you're thinking about creating something innovative that's never been done before, you get the greatest innovation, and studies have been done on this with people with different perspectives who don't look at the problem the same way.
Ms. Armstrong.
Being from one of these companies who struggles, frankly, to not only recruit, but to maintain a diverse workforce, there's a lot of challenges that have been talked about here as well. And one of them, frankly, is how do you create the snowball effect? You know, when I was always the only woman in the room, especially when you work overseas, and how do you create an environment where, especially some of the younger people want to work in. People want to work in an environment where they see a diverse team or a set of people that look like them as well. And so, you know, it's very hard to come up with a set of magic bullets, but there's a number of things that we're working on. Implicit bias does exist. I'm sure it exists in all of us. So we're trying to engineer that bias out of our systems, out of our review systems, and out of our project rotation systems. And then certainly recruiting, and also trying to show that Qualcomm and semiconductor and wireless technology is a really wonderful place to have a career, but it's a challenge.
Well, thank you. And Professor Howard, if you can just comment briefly in connection with your testimony about sort of the high cost of obtaining a patent and that as a barrier to entry for greater levels of diverse participation. I think you've spoken of sort of the patent fees as well as the cost of representation as challenges that people face, women or people of color.
Yeah, so the patent fees themselves, I wouldn't claim is as much of a challenge, but it's basically prosecuting, i.e. doing the dance with the patent examiner to finally get the patent issued. That's really the problem. That's the majority of the problem. And if you're a small business, especially women or underrepresented, every single dollar you have is primarily so that you can support the business, especially since angel and VC is not as on par with other groups.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, hopefully that's one of the things that we can examine moving forward in terms of barriers to entry, and I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, we will hear now from the representative from the state of California, the great state of California, Representative Luke Correa. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and I want to thank you for putting on this most important hearing. And I want to thank the members of the panel. I really enjoyed your comments. I come from California, Central Orange County. I represent a district that is essentially very, very blue-collar, heavily immigrant, folks that are just trying to make it on a day-to-day basis. That's a donut hole. The donut, I'm surrounded by biotech, high-tech, and our challenge is to make that jump. It's very difficult to make that jump from getting our young men and women graduating from high school to work in the biotech sector. Ms. Lee, I was very pleased to hear that there's all these programs out there that are very well kept secret, and I hope the chairman, the ranking member, all of us can work to get the message out that these programs are there. As I thought of your comments, I thought back to my days getting my MBA. The concept of actual versus perceived risk. You get an MBA, a lot of my colleagues, top class engineers, scientists getting their MBAs, top schools. All of us dream of hitting it big, the entrepreneurship, you know, the American dream. Yet a couple of years out, after you stumble a couple of times, you say, you know what? I'm gonna go after that steady paycheck. I'm not gonna go and risk my family. I want to start a family. Actual versus perceived risk. Later on, we find out 15, 20 years later that you're gonna get laid off from that big company. So maybe you should have gone and become an entrepreneur, started your business, so your destiny would have been in your own hands. That's what I'm saying, actual versus perceived risk. And I ask all of you, Ms. Cook, I think you said we got to start out early. I think we got to change the mentality of our young folks that are getting their education, which is we need to develop not tolerance, but the expectation that in your life you should be able to take these kinds of risks, do research and development, and maybe the Qualcomms of the world can step up and say, you know what, we're going to not subsidize, but we're going to invest in R&D in diversity, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's a smart business thing to do. You look at a problem from a different perspective, whether it be cultural, societal, language, or otherwise, you're gonna come up with a great idea that's gonna sell. Good business. Challenge is, how do we get our young people to understand that it's safe? It's not really that risky to be an inventor, to go off and engage in being an entrepreneur. And so I'm running out of time here, but I would ask all of you to think. I'd love to talk to you later on offline about how we roll out some of these programs. I close my eyes, I envision my high schools in my district. I started a program called Young Congressional Leaders. I meet with the kids Saturday mornings to go show them the biotech, the other career opportunities, but we don't talk much about being inventors. You know why? Because I have a lot of friends that tried to be inventors many decades ago, and they fell flat, and they ran for cover. And we need to teach those young folks, instead of running for cover, push harder and become inventors. Our country is essentially founded on entrepreneurship. Our country is founded on innovation. We need to push those folks in the donut holes in our society to move on and take command of their lives in our communities. So I have 45 seconds left, but again, love to sit down and talk to you. I'm gonna take names, I'm gonna take numbers. I wanna talk to you about how do we roll out, Ms. Lee, how we teach our kids about these programs. I wanna see my schools, my high schools, actually implement some of your programs. The pushback I get is, we don't have any money, Lou, we can't do this. And you're saying that there's money out there. We got to disconnect. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Ranking Member Roby once again.
Well, I just thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one other statement that I want to make. The infrastructure for the law school clinic and the pro se assistance programs that we've already discussed, that infrastructure, Mr. Chairman, is already in place. So expanding these programs to other universities would be of no additional expense to either the taxpayer or the patent applicants. And I think that's an important point to make as well. So if we're really serious about access to this information and to these programs, then this can be done already. So that's all I had to say. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate your participation. Look forward to continuing to work with each of you to how we can do this better. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. This has been a very important first hearing for the subcommittee. I'd like for us to continue on this topic as we proceed through this session of Congress and on into other sessions of Congress to come. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And the hearing is now adjourned.
There's only 2 of those up there. So that's how your day is going so far.